The new PSAT and new SAT does seem to lean a bit more on inference questions than the old test did. I always said for the old test that the focus on inference and implication, those types of questions, was way overblown. They were pretty rare, and they weren't typically that hard. They were almost always really just extensions of what was literally said in the text. And in some ways, that's the same here. I think on the inference questions and imply questions on the new PSAT and new SAT, you are going to have to, they're going to be more frequent, and you might have to go a little bit farther in how far you infer. But nonetheless, any inference you make is going to be really just a step or two beyond what's in the text. You got to find textual evidence for it. As we can see, this is a two-part question where we're going to find evidence to give our answer. And you don't want to go too far beyond what the text states. And I'll show you what I mean by that, particularly with choice A in number 8. But let's take a look at number 7, and let's see what we've got here. So it can most reasonably be inferred that after Miss Taylor married, she had what? Now, again, we bracket the passage from 37 to 79. We expect our answer is going to be somewhere in these lines. Let me find the pieces here that might tell us how Miss Taylor and Emma's relationship might change. So let's see. Miss Taylor married. It was Miss Taylor's loss which first brought grief. We talked about this in the previous question, how the lack of Miss Taylor is going to be felt because she's not going to be hanging out with her every day, essentially, with hanging out with Emma. Emma first sat in mournful thought of any continuance. She had then only to sink in thought of what she had lost. Again, this repetition of the word lost. The event had every promise of happiness for her friend. Mr. Weston was a great dude. The want of Miss Taylor would be felt every day. We read this previously. A large debt of gratitude was owing here, but the intercourse of the last 7 years, the equal footing and perfect unreserve, which had soon followed Isabella's marriage and their being left to each other, was yet a dearer, tender recollection. It had been a friend and companion such as few possessed, so they were really great friends. Line 73. How was she to bear the change? So, maybe this is having something to do with the change in their relationship. How was she to bear the change? It was true that her friend was going only half a mile from them, but Emma was aware that great must be the difference between a Mrs. Weston, only a half a mile from them, and a Miss Taylor in the house. And with all of her advantages, natural and domestic, she was now in great danger of suffering from intellectual solitude. So with these infer questions, it's hard sometimes to come up with your own answer. So I just recommend going right to the choices and see which one's best supported by what we read. So would Miss Taylor have less patience with Mr. Woodhouse? It doesn't really mention Mr. Woodhouse much at all. Very briefly in this paragraph with her father, who is Mr. Woodhouse, but nothing about having less patience with Mr. Woodhouse. So that just doesn't work at all. We'll get rid of A. Fewer interactions with Emma. So this seems to make sense, particularly in this last paragraph, that she's going to be moving not super far away, half a mile, but as she notes, half a mile in a house far away is pretty different from living in the house with her. And because she'll be moving far away, Emma is in danger of suffering intellectual solitude. So it seems to make sense. We can infer, this is what I was talking about before, about one step away. If she's getting married and she's no longer going to be living in the house with Emma, presumably she would have fewer interactions. That's not too far of a leap, not only based on what's said in the text, but just as a logical judgment. So B looks pretty good. Would Miss Taylor have more close friends than Emma? It just in the passage talks about how they are close friends. It doesn't mention how Miss Taylor is going to have suddenly more close friends than Emma. It just doesn't say that, and there's really no basis for us to infer that either. Would she have an increased appreciation for Emma? Certainly here we get a sense in which Emma has now an increased appreciation for Miss Taylor because she kind of understands what she's missing, right? She really feels the absence at this point now that she's gone, right? You can't appreciate something until it's gone, typical saying. But it doesn't really say anything about the opposite, that Miss Taylor would have an increased appreciation for Emma. So we'll get rid of D. So we like B, and that's going to be our answer, that she's got fewer interactions with Emma. That seems a pretty logical jump from what we've read in this part of the passage. So which choice supports it? So we liked 73 to 79. That's what we were really citing for the answer to this one, so I'm going to mark D as being a really good possibility. Let's check all the choices. Line 37, you got to be careful with this. So line 37 says, Miss Taylor married. That's all it says. So you've got to be very careful not to take this line and reason too far outside to say, oh, well, Miss Taylor's married, therefore she's going to be moving in the house with her husband, therefore she's going to be moving far away from Emma, therefore that would justify fewer interactions with Emma. There's a certain logic to that, but notice how many steps of reasoning that is to get there. Whereas this paragraph here much more clearly makes that argument, much more clearly lays out that line of reasoning. So while Miss Taylor getting married is going to lead to fewer interactions, of course, it's also basically what the question says. It's not really enough to support that inference, so A is not going to work. 47 to 48. The event had every promise of happiness for her friend. Doesn't say anything about how this will then lead to fewer interactions with Emma. How about C? A large debt of gratitude was owing here, but the intercourse of the last 7 years, the equal footing and perfect unreserve, blah, 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 was yet a dearer, tenderer recollection. Nothing here saying about how, be careful, this is probably leading you to try to pick D, getting it opposite, because this is where she is kind of thinking about how great the memories were, how much she will end up missing Miss Taylor, but it's not at all the opposite. It's not saying how Miss Taylor feels about Emma. In any event, it says nothing about our choice, how that she's going to have fewer interactions. So we can get rid of choice C, and we're left with choice D, which is the answer. To learn more about Reason Prep's SAT, SAT subject test, and ACT video courses, go to reasonprep.com/enroll, and you can find the link in the description below the video.